and say, well, you give us ours. No, you give us ours. No, you give us ours. Give it back. You know, that type of thing. That may be how it ended up in 3 pieces. I don't know. But it seems that it had been folded in such a way that it along the fold lines. So since it's from the end of Acts 2 to the beginning of Acts 3 where there's a healing goes on, some people theorize that someone later on viewed as like a healing amulet because it was a story about a healing, and so they folded it up and they'd wear it or something like that. Maybe that's why it was folded the way it was. Just like regular paper, when you fold papyrus, it breaks the the surface, and it's easier to take care of that way as far as tearing it. And so you can actually see a nomina right there. We got to put it under a microscope and examine the formation of the alphas and all sorts of stuff like that. And the curator just seemed overjoyed to be talking papyrology with somebody. I got the real feeling that his wife had gotten tired of papyrology about 30 years ago. So, you know, it was good opportunity to have some fun there. But there's P91, and that's from the Book of Acts, and I got to see that down there in Sydney. Well, after the peace of the church in AD 313, Christians could have professional scribes copy the scriptures publicly without any fear of recrimination. At this time, the great vellum or leather manuscripts began to appear, including the 3 greatest of these, Codex Sinaiticus, which is abbreviated with the Hebrew letter Aleph, Codex Vaticanus B, and Codex Alexandrinus A. Aleph and B may well have been among the Bibles copied with imperial moneys at the time of the Council of Nicaea in AD 325. In other words, we know from a letter from Eusebius that Constantine gave money for the copying of Bibles, primarily because Rome had been destroying them for so long. And people say, see, Constantine controlled what went in the Bible. No, it has nothing to do with what went in the Bible. He simply gave money to the church to copy the scriptures. And they copied the scriptures that they already had. So here is a picture of Codex Sinaiticus, pretty much what it looked like to me when I saw it in the British Library in 2005 for the first time. I walked into the collections room, and I walked right up to Sinaiticus. It's under glass, thankfully, but Sinaiticus was right here. Codex Alexandrinus was right next to it. And then behind me was a Wycliffe Bible and an original 1611 King James. And I was the only person in the room. And I'm just sort of looking around like, am I supposed to be here? You know, I mean, there's not long lines of people. I mean, and it was amazing to be right there looking at it and realizing what a vitally important thing it was. But you can't really tell by looking at it from there. Let me give you a little bit of a better idea. There's Codex Sinaiticus. That is not a printed edition. That's what it looks like. Now compare that with what we were looking at in the papyri. The regularity of the letters is just astounding. Not only the size of the letters, but the formation of the letters, and things like that. But if you're already looking with me, you can see, for example, some marginal things right here, some things written between the lines down here is an example of that, and something marginal right there. Another marginal thing right there. Some of those are what are called the Eusebian canon divisions. Here's a little variant right there. But in many instances, and we know this was done in a scriptorium, we can tell that it was produced in a scriptorium. What would happen is you would have the production of a portion of the manuscript, and then you'd have a proofreading of it. And if you had missed a fairly minor amount of material, and the rest of the page was fine, it would take a long time to reproduce this. Remember, this is being done on parchment. This is animal skin. So there was cost involved. You know, not too many people had, you know, a second Bessie out back you could knock off for a little more animal skin. So that's where we get our milk, so we don't want to get rid of her. So, and the creation of this type of parchment is so incredibly difficult to do, and it's super high quality. It's beautiful. Obviously, a lot of money went into it. So what you would do is you would insert a material in the margins. Now, I have an entire book in my library called The Scribal Habits of Codex Sinaiticus. We've identified up to 4 different scribes that worked on it. And then it was in use for about 1,500 years. And so there are much later hands that have been involved in the manuscript, writing things in and making corrections later on. Almost any Bible that is in use for over a millennium is going to have some indication of that having taken place. There is codexsinaiticus.org. The website came online a few years ago. The entirety of Codex Sinaiticus is now available. What makes that significant? Well, it's available, as you can see, in high-quality digital photography in 2 different types. The up here is the straight-on light. Here's called raking light, where you can actually see the surface of the parchment and what it looks like with the light coming from the side. And the reason that it's neat to have it all in one place is Codex Sinaiticus doesn't exist in just one place. What you saw the picture of is the major portion. But there are portions of that book in Russia, still some portions at St. Catherine's Monastery. The rest are in London. And so they got everybody together and got it all photographed, and so it's all at least in one website, even if the book is not physically in one location. And that's what makes it very useful. Some of you might be aware of the fact that, especially amongst King James only groups, Codex Sinaiticus is the devil's Bible. I mean, it is, you're just a terrible, horrible, nasty person if you even know the website. If you ever go there, you're definitely going to burn in hell forever. As a result, there are conspiracy theories, and some movies have come out recently saying that it was all forged by this guy who was lots of, some of you know that I sort of debated the guy, fell by Chris Pinto. What?
You testified.
Well, I try to use the term debated. Let's be nice. I debated Chris Pinto on this subject, and you can listen to that. My understanding is, because Chris Pinto, after that, flew me to Nashville and interviewed me for another movie, which I guess just came out. And since Chris should have sent me the movie by now and sent me the entire interview, because that was part of the agreement, was that I would be sent the entirety of the interview, so that if anything was taken out of context or something like that, that I would have, I haven't gotten any of that yet, but the movie's out. So we'll see if we get that. I haven't seen the movie, and if he sends me a copy, I'll listen to it. If he doesn't, I may not. I don't know. But there's that kind of stuff out there, and we've responded to a lot of it. And I do find myself addressing some really interesting subjects at times. I really, really do. But this is an interesting, I chose this for a particular reason. Right here, first of all, see those dots? And then you have a word written in. That's a later hand introducing a variant reading into a much older hand. And you can even tell by the tone of the ink that it's most fields about 700 years after the original was written. So that's interesting to see that. But what I liked is right here, parakletos, as one word on one line, parakletos. Does anyone know what parakletos means? Sorry? The paraclete, the helper of John 14 and 16. And I've chosen that one because I've actually made a tie. I didn't make it out of Sinaiticus. I could have, because it's all in one line like that. I actually made it out of Codex Alexandrinus, which I'll show it in a second. Codex Alexandrinus, and it has parakletos. It's John 14. It has parakletos about right here. Now, why would I make a tie like that? Well, because Jehovah's Witnesses, right? Because Muslims believe that the parakletos is Muhammad. That the helper of John 14 and 16 is not the Holy Spirit, but is Muhammad. and that originally it was periklutos, which is a variant of the word Ahmed, and hence Muhammad. A lot of them don't realize that Greek has all of its vowels written out. Instead of, in Arabic, vowels are just dots, just like in Hebrew, underneath and above letters or inside letters. But Greek isn't that way. And so periklutos would be a very different word than parakletos. The point is, on my tie, I can just hold it up and say, see this? This was hundreds of years before your prophet was born, and it says parakletos, not periklutos. So what evidence do you have that this is wrong? They sort of look at you and go, you have a tie that has that? Very strange person. I'm leaving now. So that's why I put that there. A number of hands going up, yes.
Is that a breath mark over the epsilon in the second epsilon?
Well, notice the ink. That's a much later mark. I don't know what that mark would be, but no, it wouldn't be. You wouldn't have a breather mark. It's not even over the epsilon anyways, so no. It's in a different ink. It's whatever they were writing in there as a variant is what they have there. There was another hand somewhere? Okay. Here is Codex Vaticanus, and the very word Vaticanus is enough to make most Protestants start having hives and things like that. But again, the Vatican Library is a big honkin' library, and just like the British Library, they've been collecting stuff for a long time. So there's some pretty important stuff in there, just like P72s in there. And for a long time, we didn't have really good access to Codex Vaticanus. It's dated around the same time as Sinaiticus. It's been known much longer. And unfortunately, its value has been somewhat diminished by the fact that somewhere between about 1200 and 1500, some bright person got the idea, this is fading badly, let's retrace it. And they went back over. Now you need to understand something, by the way, back up the truck. When Sinaiticus was discovered by Constantine von Tischendorf at St. Catherine's Monastery, and there's all sorts of dispute about that. I've read books and books and books on the subject. Many hundreds of miles on the bike listening to the stories about Constantine von Tischendorf, who himself was a believing Christian. He really was a wonderful fellow. But anyway, when it was found, it pushed the earliest text that we had in the New Testament back by hundreds of years. And not only that, it's a complete Bible. It's Old and New Testament. It became the earliest Greek Septuagint that we have, which is a Greek translation of the Old Testament as well. It's a huge volume. If you watch the dividing line, you see a total reproduction of it down behind me on the shelf. And it's yay thick, yay big, yay deep, weighs 45 pounds. It's not type of thing, it's not a shirt pocket New Testament unless you're Goliath, I suppose. And so both of these are copies of the entire Bible, though not completely complete. There are lacuna, there are holes where bindings fall apart, pages fall out, things like that. And I suppose I'll go ahead and tell you a story, but let me just show you this first. This was the only image of Vaticanus I've shown in this at all. You will be the first ones where I show. I've known for quite some time Vaticanus is now fully online through the Vatican Library. So you can look at all of Vaticanus now as well. And so I managed yesterday to upgrade that image. And so here's what I showed all along, is this one. Oh, back, come on. There it is. So that's John. That's the beginning of John 1:1. And you can sort of see some little dark smudges there, and things like that. But here's what it actually looks like in color. And you see the Vatican's watermark all around it there, unfortunately. But you also get a better chance seeing it's actually color there. But you can see NRK and Hologus. Well, somewhere hundreds of years before the Reformation, someone went through and they retraced every letter of this manuscript. Well, that's not helpful. If you want to ruin an ancient manuscript, that's a good way to do it. They did a fairly decent job, and even when they messed up, we can sometimes tell how they messed up and what the original letter was. It's not like it totally ruined it, but it's not something you want to do. I don't know if it was some monk that, you know what, I'm going to punish you for that. You have to retrace this entire big book. Oh, okay, great, wonderful. Who knows? But that's why it's as dark as it is it's the last over tracing was not all that long ago. And then here is Codex Alexandrinus, and it's a beautiful manuscript. That's why I used it for the tie. Was because it makes for a very, very nice sort of yellow goldish color manuscript, and it's from around AD 400 or so. So these major manuscripts, like Vaticanus, Sinaiticus, they pushed the earliest text back by hundreds of years, and then of course the papyri come along, and they then push it back because if let's put Sinaiticus around 350, so P45, say around 200, so you're talking 150 years earlier. And one of the major problems with the Codex Sinaiticus is a modern-day fake thing, is that many of the unique readings of these major unsealed texts traceable straight back to the papyri, which of course are found in Egypt someplace. The number of people who would have to be involved in this conspiracy would number in the thousands and extend over 150 years. So, you know, those types of conspiracies, easy to promulgate, not easy to actually pull them off. But I will close with a little inside story here, which I don't care if I think I've told the story on the body one, so it doesn't really matter if it's going out. But this manuscript here, Codex Vaticanus, how many of you have seen the book Kingdom of the Cults by Walter Martin? Okay.
Really? I
Yeah,
would expect a lot more.
I expected everybody. For many years, Kingdom of the Cults was the cult book. I mean, Walter Martin was sort of a pioneer in that area, obviously. And for years, that was published by Bethany House Publishers, who's one of my major publishers as well. And I had been told by the folks at Bethany House that the family had forbidden that the actual words of Martin be altered at all. So you couldn't really do any editing. You just publish it and just leave it the way it is. Well, after I wrote the King James Only controversy, Bethany House approached me and said, would you be interested in being involved in editing the Mormonism and Jehovah's Witness sections of Kingdom of the Cults? And I said, edit? How can you edit it if you can't change it? We're gonna go ahead and update. We're actually gonna update the material, update the information, and so you will be able to, you know, whatever you need to fix, you need to fix. I said, well, okay, but I don't want my name on it. And they're like, that's fine, just as long as the material's good. So I went through the sections on Mormonism, Jehovah's Witnesses. There's only so much you could do without just completely rewriting everything. Obviously, it takes a little bit of a different approach than I do, and there was certain information that was rather dated. I did what I could do to try to make it a little bit more accurate. While I was reading it, I ran across this strange reference where Martin said, Jesus is, it was in the Jehovah's Witness section, Jesus is identified as the Alpha and the Omega. And then he, for some reason, decided to list some early manuscripts where Jesus is identified as the Alpha and the Omega in the book of Revelation. And one of the lists was Codex Vaticanus. And I sort of, it seems strange that you would, you know, it's one thing to say he's identified as Jehovah, as Alpha and Omega in the book of Revelation, which he is. And you bring out what Alpha and Omega are, and, you know, okay, fine. But I went back through all the earlier editions of King of the Cults, and that was an original statement that had been there from the very beginning. And I just had to sit there and wonder how many people have caught this. I don't think most Jehovah's Witnesses would ever catch it. 99.99% of Christians never would, and I'd say 99.5% of seminary graduates would never catch that it's impossible that Jesus is called Alpha and Omega in Codex Vaticanus, because Codex Vaticanus ends at Hebrews 9:14. It doesn't contain the book of Revelation. It probably did, but it doesn't anymore. And 10th or 11th century manuscript has been bound into the Codex to finish it off, but everyone, that even has a different number. That's even been identified as a different manuscript, a different number. Codex Vaticanus ends at Hebrews 9:14. It doesn't contain Revelation. And the only reason I knew that was I had just written the King James only controversy. So I fixed it. You know, I took the reference out and made it accurate, and so when that edition was out, it had been fixed. Well, I discovered just a few years ago that there was a fallout between Walter Martin's family and Bethany House on the publication of that book. And so the one that is now published under the editorship of Ravi Zacharias, that same error is right back where it's always been. It says that Jesus is called Alpha and Omega in Codex Vaticanus, and that's what it'll always end up saying, because it can't be changed, even though. Yes, sir.
Regarding Walter Martin, he can you address the issue with the SDA movement? Because last I heard, it was no longer considered a cult. You took issue with that based upon the what do you call it?
Investigative judgment. Yeah.
Yes.
Just real briefly, I mentioned this, I think, maybe last night when I was talking about the unbelievable webcast, that this former Christian minister became an atheist was actually former Seventh-day Adventist. And I don't have time to go into it right now, but from my perspective, my understanding of Seventh-day Adventist theology, and someone asked about, could you give me a good book on Seventh-day Adventist? I can't, I've not read one. My knowledge of SDA theology has come from reading SDA books. About half of my mom's family were Seventh-day Adventists. And so they were coming after me when I was younger, so I did what I had done with the Mormons, Jehovah's Witnesses. I got their books, read their books, and the teaching of Ellen G. White, and yes, I know she was married to a guy named James R. White, I already know that. The teaching of Ellen G. White on the investigative judgment was that, in essence, Christ returned in the failed Millerite movement back there in the middle 1800s, and ever since then he's been examining everyone's life who believed in him in his heavenly temple to see whether they lived the law faithfully enough for him to apply his atonement to them. So whether the atonement is applied to you is dependent upon whether you live the law faithfully enough to be worthy of its application. That is just as serious as any error that Rome has in regards to the gospel. That's an utter denial of the gospel of grace. I cannot possibly see how that could be viewed any other way. So because of that, the word cult depends on how you define it. I'm not big on the use of that term, but I am big on whether something is totally contrary to the gospel and hence falls under the condemnation of Galatians chapter 1, and I would say the investigative judgment most definitely does. So are there Seventh-day Adventists today that do not believe in investigative judgment? From what I've heard, yes. Who they are, I cannot tell you, don't know. But until there is a denomination-wide rejection of that element of legalism and that doctrine of the investigative judgment, that's the issue there. Okay. All right. So with that, we got to pick up the pace, but we will be